Welcome to Club E. Hi, I am Rick Brimacombe of Brimacombe and Associates. I'm your architect of business growth and will work with you to unlock your potential and amplify the scale of your company. Today, we are talking about avoiding fast start, no finish during the Great Resignation. I want to thank our sponsors, Irish Titan, an e-commerce and web development firm, Highland Bank, a locally owned community bank, Romaine Berg, a digital marketing agency, and Schwegman, Lumberg, Woosner, an intellectual property law firm. Please hit the subscribe button below the video. That will help us deliver better content to you, our fabulous audience. And as a reminder, you can catch our Club E podcast on your favorite platform, whether that be Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, and many others. All right, let's introduce today's guest. Welcome, Scott Propp. Scott is managing director of Dentro Consulting, a business that he has been running for the last 10 years. It's been a privilege to know Scott and interact with Scott both as a friend and as a business contact and associate. And we've had many interactions over the years, and it's a pleasure to have you with us, Scott. Welcome.
Thank you, Rick. It's good to be here.
Yeah, and again, Scott's contact info will be down below the video. And we will also share some other things about getting a hold of Scott in later in the presentation today. His email, though, for those folks just listening, is scott@scottpropp, and Propp is spelled Propp.com. So again, scott@scottpropp.com. All right, let's start with Scott, you telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, your firm, and all the different things that you're involved with.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. Thanks for having me on, and I appreciate those that are on the listening side of the microphone here. So I did 3 decades in corporate America, and a design engineer by background, and worked my way through a large manufacturing organization and into international business development. And then finally finished up in the chief technology office and did a lot of R&D work. So that gave me a broad scope of how projects come to be and how they come to be in the market space. So I retired from that firm in 2011 and started Dentro Consulting with an eye towards helping people get that cross-functional, cross-team work done that I saw come to a halt in many organizations. And I've had the pleasure of serving dozens and dozens of organizations and executives in that capacity. And and today we get to talk a little bit about the effect of the great pandemic on that kind of activity.
And then you also have done some, numerous volunteer roles over the years. Maybe talk a little bit about some of that.
Yeah. On the community side, I do a lot with Habitat and do some home building and so forth. Really enjoy that. I've been a ski guide for blind and disabled skiers in the past. Find that to be very rewarding as well.
And then again, just for our audience, I have had the privilege of interacting with Scott on a number of things, both personally and professionally. And love having you here today, Scott. Thanks for spending the time and sharing some of your insights. Speaking of your insights, you interviewed a large number of companies and executives in the latter half of 2021. And at that point, we all had been pushing close to 2 years of various sorts of lockdowns and life changes and maybe illnesses, and maybe folks even unfortunately having deaths in their family or at their company or whatever. But talk a little bit about what you found in your research from all that work you did at the tail end of 2021.
Yeah, no, love to, and love to make this a really fresh conversation. So we're recording this at the end of January in 22, and it is, we've just come through the Omicron wave. We're starting to peak out of that a little bit. And in fact, some of the latest conversations with manufacturing organizations is still a solid 8 to 10% of the workforce is being affected by that. which just continues to echo through the supply chain and so forth. But what I want to do today with you, Rick, is just talk about what's going on in the organizations and give you a sense of what I'm getting from the front lines. And then we'll talk a little bit more about how to unlock that. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and share a slide.
Sure, go for it.
So just a moment here while we bring this up. All right. Yep, there we go. So what I want to do to start with is to just set the context and kind of get people to kind of mentally place themselves on this little bell curve chart that I have in front of us here. What I've been talking to and what I've been doing in these interviews is asking executives how they find A, themselves, and B, their work groups in the ability to get stuff done. And just to give you the lay of the land here, to the left of the first dotted line is that red segment. And I'm calling that sacrificial effort. And a lot of us, when we got hit by the pandemic, immediately jumped in, right, and went to work on what we could to carry our firms over the hill. And we thought that was going to be a short-term effort. and the truth was that
2 weeks, right? Right, Scott? It was supposed to be 2 weeks, right?
2 weeks to bend the curve. Yeah, you remember that one? Wow. And what happened was we got in this constant, dopamine crisis, right? Where we come in every day and things, big fundamental process and value decisions needed to be made on a daily basis. We were all hoping to get out of that. You would be surprised at how many executives I talk to that are still feeling like they're in that zone. And I'll share in a moment where the majority of firms find themselves. But this is the hard part. This big yellow zone I call hopeful work. And in hopeful work, we're kind of doing business as usual, right? We create ideas, we do action plans, we assign dates to them in a fairly linear way. So, decisions in this zone get made, sometimes questioned and reversed. Things are coordinated at a task level, so you feel like things are tied together, but you know that you're just not getting the efficiency or the outcomes that you would expect, right? And when we're really moving along. This very first green zone, I call linear progress. And it's where things have settled in a little bit. Decision-making gets better. They get made and deployed better. We have we have one team or two teams that are really killing it. Maybe one or two that we have very personal performance with. We know that Julianne's team is just amazing. Every time we assign something to her, she gets it done, right? She's able to do that. And then the last one I call geometric growth. And this is where a team really begins to feed on its own capabilities and abilities to do really integrated implementation. They're executing high stakes decisions. They're getting it done. Everybody in the organization's on the same page, right? It's just that highest level of performance. In talking to these executives, what I found is the majority of them put themselves in the high yellow zone, and with some executing as high as linear progress, and then a grouping in the sacrificial effort zone. And it's fascinating that many of them thought after, as things tailed down a little bit here, that the organization would just snap back. Instead, as I talk to people more and more, what they're finding is that the trauma has kind of pinned people in place. So that, what they had expected to be kind of a linear walk to the right here has become more of a, we're stuck in a spot.
Can I jump in and ask a question here?
I'd love to have any questions, Rick.
Okay, so I noticed in looking at this chart, the two sections to the left cross over the peak and take up more than 50% of the space. And then as we move to the right, those zones get smaller and smaller. Talk about the process of moving through these zones and why, very evidently, looking at your chart, a very small number make it all the way off to the far right, and why it's so hard to move from one level to the next.
Yeah. And I'll unpack that a little bit more in a moment, but the
Okay.
high level answer is humans are pattern making machines, right? We tend to and really want to execute the same way. Many of us in 2019 had an absolute pattern burned in. We'd get our coffee in the same place every day. We'd walk down the same side of the hallway. We take the same path to work, and so forth. All those patterns were blown up, right? But humans didn't change in their core behavior. They wanted to get back to some level of performance, right? So we blew the world apart into hybrid work, and everybody quickly kind of found a groove. And now that those grooves have been in place for a couple of years, we're pretty stuck. That has become the new normal, and I think it's holding people in place, which is one of the things that I've seen, and something I want to go to work on. The thing I just unpack with you quick here is this slide, which I use to talk about why it's hard to move to that next level. So usually I talk about this being the market and this being the product, but we can use this chart in a number of different ways. With the core being right here. So this is the stuff that we do well, and it's well within our process zone. And for what we just talked about, it's the new normal, right? It's how we behave. We know in our bones that there's a much better zone of performance out here. The next product, the next solution, the next way of working, and we'd love to get there. But the hard part is this is an absolute moat. It's a very difficult path to cross. And the reason is just what we talked about, right? Uncertainty, right, is a massive pushback here. And we as humans tend to wait, right, to cross gaps like that until we know the way across, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about how to lay that out a little bit. But there are ways and to guide ourselves through this. And that's what I want to talk about in a second here is how do we get that pathway established, right? How do we get across that?
All right.
This is a familiar curve, but I think one that can help unpack this a little bit. So standard hero's journey stuff, right? Joseph Campbell, the hero with 1,000 faces. All of life tends to be a curve like this. I call it journey 1, journey 2 for today. Journey 1 is largely mimicked by the early stage career journey many of us have had, right? We start with a basis of academics. Then we have some experience. Then we have some competence, right? And then we begin to integrate those. And we get to a first peak of performance in our careers, in our businesses, and work our way to the top of that. But this journey is largely driven by hustle, right? We put a lot of effort into that first journey, and we rarely take time to reflect on that. But there comes a point, right, in any one of these journeys where we just can't hustle enough, right? And this is kind of what pins people into the yellow. Is we're working really hard, right? We're working very, very hard, but the efficiency begins to get on the back side of this curve. And that's the spot that really drains performance from people, right? The harder you work, the less you get out. And a lot of people are on the back side of that curve right now. So that yellow piece we talked about is right in here. And the question is there a way to avoid going all the way through this peak of despair and get on the second journey, right? Which is some have characterized this as the second mountain peak. And the really challenging piece of this, the hard part of this, is you have to take some things away. You have to remove some clutter from what you did to the first peak to get started on the second. And the thing that myself and other colleagues can do is to help you make that turn early, right? To make that turn in a better way. So the journey of getting out of yellow is really doing the deeper diagnostic work, right? So that you can make that turn. So I'm curious if you have any questions as I'm unpacking this, Rick.
Well, one I threw at you earlier is how hard it was, why it was hard to move from one to another, which you've touched a little bit on that. What are some of the things that we need to let go of? I mean, you mentioned clutter, which for me personally is a fabulous term to work from, because I tend to, whether it's at my house or in my work life, have a little too much going on, which then kind of clutters my my mind or visually here at the house. And so talk a little bit about things that we need to let go of, and maybe explore that a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give you a real up close example on that. So I'm working with a firm right now that has a fabulous process that they put together for new product introduction in the 18-19 timeframe, right? And they've been trying to execute it at the hybrid level right now. And it's really, really hard for them to see that a lot of those steps in the journey don't fit anymore. So we're actually taking that apart, and we're once again going through and being very intentional about what's adding value here and what's not adding value, and getting rid of those extra steps and work. Again, in a hybrid environment, it's mind-numbing for the people in the process to know that what they're working on doesn't add a lot of value. It's really hard to work on that, especially in an environment where you don't have your peers to support you. So we're going through that kind of let's sort things into value add and non-value add at the process level. At the team level, right? Things have changed a lot. We don't get to look at each other in teamwork anymore. We get to look through these little digital devices at each other, right? So there's a lot to be done there. Just in choosing and writing the narrative around the project, making that really super clear, super attainable. Any fuzziness really holds people back from this second journey.
How about integration? Obviously, there's these disparate pieces, and then we got our own belief systems that sometimes we can hold on to that get in our way, and that's kind of our subconscious maybe getting in the way. But talk about how these pieces need to be integrated.
Yeah, so what I've found in my research work and in my professional career is when people go after this, and practitioners typically go after this, they go after like a rifle shot in one particular area. They'll go deep on personal performance and leadership aspects, missing the dynamics of the team itself. They'll go very deep on how to ideate and create the project, and miss the aspects of team and plan. They'll select an off-the-shelf process, which may or may not support them. So the work that I do and the tool that I use here, which I'll share with you, is a very integrated framework for how all this stuff fits together. So at the very center of this is this idea of transformation capacity. The idea that we can take on this work, and with high confidence we can scope it, put a group of people around it, and complete it. Three pieces that jump out of this. One is leverage direction. When we look at this, do we say, yes, there's leverage here? For every ounce of effort I put in, do I get an ounce and a quarter of benefit out of it, right? Is it building momentum, or is it like when we're in the red zone, sacrificial effort? Leverage direction is one of the three keys here. The second one is actionable confidence. Do we have something that we are able to say with high confidence that, if we go to work on this, the probability of a positive outcome is very high. We'll talk a little bit about this, but it's an alignment between the project that we've chosen and the assets that we have to go execute it with. And then the last of the three is internal clarity, right? Do we really understand it very specifically how all the pieces fit together? Many times we leave this for people to sort out. And the truth is, clarity is an accelerator by removing all the excess between the plan and the team. All those question marks go away and things really move forward powerfully.
Maybe you're going to, I was going to say, maybe, no, maybe you're going to dive into that next, but
Yep.
How do you maybe, I don't know if rank is the right word, but obviously all these carry their own challenges. Are any of them harder than the next, or from an execution standpoint, they're all kind of equal?
Yeah, so they all, when you're done, you want them all equal. Everybody starts in the matrix at a different spot. And that's why we do a diagnostic at the outset, because all of these elements are not equally applicable for any leadership group or firm, right? So one of the things we do is we walk through this in a very deliberate way to help people score themselves through this and really come to an understanding of which of these elements would give them the highest payback for actually leaning into.
Okay.
So the model breaks out in this way. For the leverage direction piece, right, we're really looking at the combination of project and plan. And this is the idea of, have we chosen a dynamic project and put it into play with a structure that accesses the assets that we have to do it. So the key element here really comes down to whether we have, for instance, executed in a way that allows us to choose something that really fits. So many software organizations use Agile for everything. Agile is not necessarily the right tool for everything, right? It is a tool that is a very incremental and useful tool, right? It takes us somewhere. Waterfall, while being much maligned, is not dead, right? And in certain organizations and in certain situations, it's something that we need to do. So we go from these off-the-shelf kind of methodologies to a very tailored methodology for execution that feeds into linear direction. And on the project side, right, we select a very effective project, and we anchor that in a way that we can talk about in a minute here. That gives people this idea that, you know what, for every time we turn the crank on execution, we're going to get a lot out of this. The next one is this idea of team. I call it unstoppable team, which is a trademark item. But the idea here is, have we really assembled the best resources that we can get our hands on? For a large organization, these can be largely internal. For smaller organizations, it really is, can we put together a cluster of talent based on individuals inside and outside the organization? And how does that line up against the project, right? We stack these two together, and out of that, we come up with a measurement for actionable confidence. What is our confidence level that with this project and this team, a positive outcome will ensue? And that leaves the last combination at the bottom here, right? The customized plan and the team carefully aligned puts things together in a powerful outcome. Now, each of these three blocks around the outside represents a piece of work, an effort, a workshop, perhaps, but it's where we go when we do the diagnostic work.
Do you see any commonalities across companies as to which area they struggle with most? In addition to that, what about what's kind of the one area that you see most often in these three different buckets, the project, the team, and the plan?
Yeah, yeah. So almost everybody enters this at the project level, my specific practice is really largely around execution. So my work is usually to take the strategy that they've gotten from one of the big six strategy shops and help them disassemble that strategy and put it together in a way that we can effectively execute it. So many times the scenario is that we enter on the project level. For those that have that part nailed and they've got the actionable plan put together, the second most popular entry point is through the team side. They've attempted to get the strategic execution rolling, but for whatever reason, they've run out of momentum. And usually that shows itself up in either questions about the leadership capacity or questions about the team capacity. So that's probably the second most popular way to go after that. To answer your question about what's the key elements here, I can give you a couple of examples. One thing we look at on the team side is something I call equipping. And many teams skip this step entirely. They get a group assembled and they immediately go to the task level and try to start executing. And something as simple as a half-a-day workshop where you spend some time getting to know one another in a rich way and begin to understand everybody's leadership styles and blind spots a little bit can really move a team from a group of individuals to a group that is actually supporting and helping each other across the finish line. It's a remarkably high leverage investment that I see many firms skip. On the project piece here, one of the big ones I call informed. And one of the things I find is that many people take off on a project trajectory without really having gotten the best outside information. And Rick, I know this is a spot in your space, right? Where you'll work with an entrepreneur and help them to make sure that they got access to the best thinking in the space, right? That's exactly what this informed mode is have you done the work? Are you confident that the incremental activity that you're doing is really bringing value, is really bringing value not only in a local zone, but to the larger zone. On the plan side, one of the things we talk about here is orchestration. The idea that, when we do handoffs, that we have all the players present, that nobody's speaking on anybody's behalf, right? If we need to have this produced by somebody, that they're part of the conversation. Similarly, if we need a component from somewhere, that they're part of the conversation, that we really have an end-to-end handoff that we've established. So that's an example of 3 of the 9. I hope that shines a little light in here.
That's valuable. I want to go back to one of the things you said at the start of the presentation, which is people get stuck in a groove. They get their coffee at the same place. One of the things that you said that I chuckle a little bit is they walk on the same side of the hallway down to their office or cube or what wherever. Anyway, yes, I totally agree with you. Creatures of habit. We all are to some degree. Where do you get the most resistance in this model? So you lay out this model. Where do people struggle the most, either getting up the curve with you, or they hold on to their way of doing it maybe more than some others, and maybe it's equal across the board, but I'm just kind of curious if you see challenges in one bucket or the other.
Yeah, well, what I find, and I work with a lot of strategists inside organizations that are accountable for implementing their project, right? So I get to work on the plan and the team piece a lot with them. But a really effective execution of a project with an organization always involves a tweak to the project itself.
Okay.
And people fall in love with the first instantiation, right? The first go at the project, and they hold on to that way too long. And I'm sure you've seen this too, Rick, where the market will be screaming, pivot, pivot, pivot.
Yeah.
And people just cling to that like a security blanket. And I understand. I mean, I'm human as well, and I have my own affinities as well. But if there was one spot that I would coach people to be to hold loosely, right, is that initial project instantiation, because there's opportunity to, there's almost always opportunity to add value by loosening the grip on that a little bit.
And why do you think that is? Is it the kind of the sunk cost theory that they put in, mind share, they've invested some dollars, they've gotten a little momentum or people on the train or whatever. Do you think that's the main driver with that issue, or do you think there's something else?
Yeah, it's usually so the way we go to work on that is I get everybody into a room and we talk about and we go into what everybody sees, the vision piece, and then we back up to why they see that. And typically what happens is they're like 80% in agreement, right? The underlying picture is pretty much in agreement, but there's some real differences in 2 or 3 of the things that each of them is looking at. And they've each created their own forward forecast of how it's going to play out. And by unpacking the roots of that and then talking about that in a clear, kind of eyes open way, it usually goes away. But unless you elevate the discussion to get it out of the compete retreat kind of balance, you can get stuck there a long time. It's highly value added to unpack that discussion, because you can stay in gridlock for a long time there.
Okay, all right. So talk a little bit. I know where we're going to go from here is the trajectory and companies kind of moving through your process. Talk a little bit about that and maybe introduce some new stuff to us here.
Yeah, no, happy to do it. And the model that we just talked about is really the tool to kind of move across that uncertainty band that we talked about in that previous model. But one of the things I just want to leave people with that is really a fundamental challenge and opportunity. Those of you listening to this either on audio or on video, just basically mapping a today situation. There's a set of circumstances, tensions, talent inside your organization that have led you right to where you are today, right? And if you want to move in any direction, you're going to have to change that, right? You have to change your thinking. You have to change the framework that people are using to think about things with. There's going to need to be some change. So based on the information that we've talked about today, there's really 3 pathways. The first one that is way too common is you'll turn off the podcast and go back on with life, right? The horizontal trajectory. And the issue with not changing right now and not being open to the work that we talked about, their talent feeling like they're on the backside of that curve, I think is immensely risky. I think it's probably a bit fictitious that you would actually stay there. I would say there's probably a higher than 50-50 chance that you're really looking at decline, right? Decline of some sort. And it is really scary right now. I talk to executives, I get phone calls all the time of leaders in organizations that aren't sure that they're comfortable with the process going forward, right? So if that's going on and the subject matter experts are nervous, that's going to create some really strange bedfellows. So I would just encourage people to really think about, get your leaders comfortable, get them comfortable on a trajectory, and get the leaders to move first. In this retention game that we're working with right now, clear strategy and very effective roles and jobs is key to winning this battle. You can shovel compensation and all kinds of other near-term incentives, but those are not lasting. What really will last is really good strategic execution. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about what that looks like, right? So I'm going to sketch a box up here to the north and east, right? And we're gonna definitely want to go there. But the point I want to make here is that all these 3 lines are very close today, right? So your today snapshot is what it is. But every step you take inside the organization, every dollar you spend, every conversation you have, every new interaction you have moves you down one of those 3 lines. And when you're close to today, it doesn't take a lot of incremental effort to get on the green line. But move yourself down the road 6 or 9 months, right? And allow that cumulative performance to settle in. And you get stuck either on the horizontal line, or it takes a pretty significant investment of time, money, and resources to make that jump up to the green line. So my challenge always is to people, think about this carefully and make your choices carefully, because you really every day go in and choose one of these lines.
So one of the things I've said in presentations over the years is, especially in early stage investing and being involved in emerging growth companies, is being wrong and being early look exactly the same. And to try to move to the right of the journey here to try to figure some of that stuff out. Totally agree with you. At the front end, they look very similar. So are there some tricks maybe to try to determine the different path you're on the front end, so that they can course correct early on versus waiting till maybe it's even too late?
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think there's two things that I would point to right off the top here. One is employee engagement is almost a superpower at the outset. And C-level executives really ignore that at their peril. A lot of times that's delegated into the HR team, and those reports never get to the top of the house. Excuse me, and that's a mistake, because engagement shows up and is a leading indicator of where you're going to be on this trajectory chart every time. And I know we talk about doing some windshield time with the sales team, spending time close to the market, look for that spark, look for that uniqueness, right? Constantly looking for that. But that is almost always reflected in the engagement level of the team. And I would really encourage people to take a serious look at that. The second thing is, at every level of engagement, particularly with new value creation, Rick, the space that you work into, get very, very nervous if you're not hearing from the client about changes, rearranges, new ideas, new opportunities. You want to see that effect, that engagement reflected in asks. And it's not a hard metric, but I would be very nervous if you're not receiving regular asks for changes, updates, or different path directions for your product. It just means that the folks that you're beta-ing with, you're not top of mind, you're not top of the house, and that too makes me nervous and would lead to an early diagnostic here.
Yeah, and you mentioned it early about the pivoting, or I should say lack of pivoting when they're hearing things. And a lot of people attach a negative stigma to doing a pivot. And I've always said actually the opposite. If you didn't pivot or are not pivoting, you're not listening. And so that, to me, I agree with you 100% on that front. What about kind of the inverse of this? Any kind of red herrings or false positives where somebody reads the tea leaves or makes an assumption, oh, I saw this, I experienced this, I heard this, therefore I'm on the right path, but it ends up not being true. So are there any things that can be deceiving or misinterpreted for an executive?
Yeah, I think, and you in your question, you kind of shared this a little bit, and that is, be very wary of point questions and point solutions, right? So you want to have a vector, you want to definitely have a macro direction that you intend to move the firm towards, right? And you will get very strong sideways input from time to time, but you want to treat your strategic direction as having momentum, right? And you don't want to pivot it on a dime. So no matter how strong this input is, it needs to be questioned and interviewed, right? And this gets really tough because you can have board members that have really strong opinions, right? This can be very challenging. But doing that homework, right, to make sure that that you're on the core track that you need to be on for the minimum product for the maximum amount of utilization and shareholder value creation. Yeah, and this usually looks like strong individual, and I call it point information that doesn't integrate with the rest of the product or solution. And this is where the C-suite really earns its keep, right? Because they're holding onto the highest value direction while flexing without bending, right? And that is the challenge of early stage leadership.
How about on the decline side, if engagement was maybe the key thing to see early on as to what trajectory you might find yourself on, what about the opposite as you look at folks that unfortunately ended up on the decline trajectory and had a poor outcome? If you had to look for some commonalities for that community, I mean, and you've touched on a few, but maybe there's something even more specific that you say, oh yeah, if I see this, it's almost a dead giveaway that it's not a surprise that they ended up on that decline trajectory.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm going to go back to that little curve I shared earlier. Not uncommonly, there's a number of what I call local peaks, right, in the course of building an organization where you'll have localized success and people will lock onto that and say, oh, that's our business model. and then quickly find out that by changing that concept, they actually get themselves into this spot where the actual value they're delivering gets diluted. And they put themselves in the position where there's now competitors and other activities going on. So one of the things I talk about is be very careful if you're delivering a unit of value. Let's say you've got a $5,000 B2B service activity that you're doing, and suddenly you're getting a lot of price pressure. You're getting activities. Now it's been a very successful run, right? Rather than looking at what has made that successful, many firms will yield to the price pressure and begin selling it at $4,500 and $4,000, right? And when that incremental ASP or sales price begins to have pressure on it, and you start to run up the volume at those lower pressures, that is an early stage decline scenario. And it doesn't feel like it because cash is still being added to the balance sheet, right? But you're actually losing ground in your incremental internal efficiency. It's that kind of stuff that you got to watch for really carefully because it feels good at the time. Everybody's busy, actions are being taken. But the problem is you play that scenario out and we're trading money. And that's not what people pay us for when we're discovering early stage value. We're activating fresh and non-linear value, right? And that is one of the things I coach in that area.
I agree with you on that front. Oftentimes, the folks in the company and the executives see the busyness and the progress, and they get enamored with that when you might look at the business from a shareholder value perspective, and energy is being spent in areas that really aren't benefiting a business based on their business model, and either a potential buyer or an investor looking at that business is going to value a certain aspect of that business more than the others, and they got locked into, yeah, but we're generating revenue over here, yeah, but this is where we're getting our cash. But in reality, like you said, they're just basically trading time against a few dollars and not really benefiting or generating incremental shareholder value.
Yeah, with you 1,000%. It's I see that way too commonly. And it's really hard. It's really hard to bury, and at some point you have to let go of that initial success for the bigger prize, right? That's a tough call, but that's the call that we put on early stage executives in this space, is to make those gains.
So we've dug in here a little bit. Last question. How does one figure out that they're on the right path? Is there a process that they should go through to say, what's my next right step? Or what questions do they need to ask themselves so that they can feel comfortable saying to themselves, I think I am taking the next right step?
Yeah, so the challenge and we'll talk a moment in what it actually looks like, but the category that falls into is it's really hard to read the label when you're in the jar. So for firms that have feel a twinge as they look at this kind of stuff and say, hey, we ought to take a look at this, I would encourage you to get in touch with someone to help you with it. These diagnostics that we've talked about are not onerous. They're not weeks and weeks and weeks of project activity, right? We're talking days and hours and one-on-one interviews. These things go pretty fast. And I would encourage people to consider doing that because in a relatively short amount of time, you can get directional guidance from someone that honestly has your best interest in mind and go ahead and go after that. And I'm easy to get a hold of. Happy to have a conversation. Almost every conversation starts with a 20-minute chat. So I put that on the table as a gift to anyone listening to this podcast. Happy to help. I publish several times a week on LinkedIn, and I would invite anybody to join up with me there. And lastly, I have a mailing list and a blog that has more in-depth work on it. There's a 1,500-word article that comes out every Wednesday. So yeah, happy to help, happy to engage the conversation. And I have found, by the way, that the Twin Cities has been amazing as far as engaging the conversation, well, at many layers and levels. This is a great place to do business.
Well, you've been a fabulous contributor to the clubby community over the years, both in presenting and talking to the group back in the day when we were doing live events, and now here on the digital interview format, but then also just being a contributor in the community, sharing your wisdom and knowledge with folks when we're doing the meet and greets and shaking hands and such. And so you've been a wonderful contributor, and I'm grateful to have you a part of the clubby community, as well as to be able to call you a friend. Let me ask a couple of last questions around kind of more my own personal curiosity. Ask these questions almost every time of the folks who come on, but it's always interesting to me the careers which are so, as you showed, up and down and twists and turns. I'm guessing that not only have you learned many lessons over the years, but maybe there was an important lesson or one that really stuck out that you said to yourself, gee, I wish I would have learned that one a little bit sooner. Anyway, anything stand out in a lesson that you could have benefited knowing a little sooner in your career?
Yeah, no, great question, Rick. I think the number one thing, and I was trained as a technical guy, master's in engineering, and what I didn't realize when I entered the workplace was not everyone saw things the way I saw them. And falling on the introverted side of the fence, I didn't speak up as much as I should have for early on, right? Helping people and getting engaged in conversation. So my number one coaching point, especially for my technology leaders, is that rich conversation that you're having in your mind. Share that because there's a lot there. There's a lot of opportunity for people to engage and improve and build on what you're seeing. And you see things differently. You have different experiences and insight, right? And that rich mix of understanding that everybody that walks into the room has a story and an opportunity to contribute is something that I wish somebody would sat me down early and said, you know what, you're helpful, but you could be extraordinary if you would speak into the conversation.
And some of that is their sharing, and some of that is our being willing to listen
Yes.
I always am fascinated where you go into a meeting room or maybe a board meeting or whatever, and person who speaks the loudest gets the most airtime, and other people maybe a little introverted and
Yeah.
not quite as forward, don't get the airtime. So I always try to work hard to give everybody the opportunity to speak their piece, kind of like what you were saying there, Scott.
I love that. Yeah, no paid audiences. Everybody earns their seat at the table by speaking into the conversation.
Yep. All right, last question for you. How would you summarize today's conversation, or was there one kind of key takeaway that you want everybody to leave with and maybe reflect upon so that they can bring it to their company and maybe change some things or do things better going forward?
Yeah, I think it's all the way back to that early bell curve that we went through. If you find yourself in that yellow zone, it's easy to believe that time is going to make that better. My experience now, 9 months into talking with leaders and working with leaders, is that it takes work to move from that yellow to any of the green cycles. It takes an investment. It takes a start of a conversation. It takes willing participation to move that. And I think that's counter from a lot of what we learned as executives, right? Everything's continuous improvement. In this case, I think the trauma has been seared in pretty tightly. And I think you could very easily look at the calendar in 2023 and look up and say, wow, we're still in the yellow zone. That would be what I'd leave you with, is where are you and what direct effort can you do to get yourself out of that?
Okay, great. Thank you. Remind everybody what your email address is, because again, while we do have some folks watching the video, we also have people listening. So remind everybody what your email is, Scott.
Yeah, happy to. So it's Scott, SCOTT, at Scott, SCOTTPROPP.com. You can find me on all the socials as well.
All right, great. Thank you again, Scott. It's been a pleasure. I have greatly appreciated what you've done for me, both personally and professionally. There actually were a couple, I remember walking outside when the weather was warm here in Minnesota during that first year of COVID lockdown, and you settled me down a couple times, and we talked about some structural things going on with some of my portfolio companies and my own business. And so thank you, Scott, for your work with me. I've seen you present to a number of different groups from the audience's perspective. I know that they've benefited from you, and so I'd encourage our entire audience to consider reaching out to Scott and working with him, or just having a conversation, as he said. So he's been wonderful to me, very valuable. So thank you, Scott. I've enjoyed today and look forward to having you back again.
Oh, Rick, thank you so much for the kind words. And I just really enjoy serving the community here. This is a fantastic opportunity. So thank you.
Great. Thank you.